Good morning, everybody, and thanks for tuning into the Capitalist Cast. Joining me today is Representative Seth Grove. And Representative Grove and I were just kind of joking before we got started. We're going to talk about what was the name of the piece of legislation. It has a great title, by the way.
The Pennsylvania Voting Rights Protection Act.
So the Pennsylvania Voting Rights Protection Act, which is just a massive piece of legislation that you guys have been working on since the election, essentially.
Yeah.
You held 14 hearings. You talked to pretty much everybody who's involved in the election process. And this would be the first major overhaul of the election code really since 1939 or something like that.
Yeah, 1937 when the original code came in.
So talk to us. I mean, there's a lot of provisions. There's a lot in here. Give us kind of a quick rundown of what all is in it, and then we can dive into some of the specific provisions, I think.
Yeah, through our hearings, and this is rooted in best practices from other states, what our actually law says and does, and how counties actually administer these, and not only counties, but how judge of elections and poll workers actually administer the elections in the Commonwealth. And we found a lot of issues that we wanted to address and bring in some best practices of other states that have run very successful elections over the past decade. This bill, if you think about it, it's the largest election reform introduced in the country. It's the largest election reform introduced out of any state since really Florida in 2000. And this is, as you stated, the largest election reform bill introduced since the election code of 1937 was adopted. So there's a lot of great stuff in here. And listen, we're interested in protecting voting rights through three areas, right? Accessibility, integrity, and access or modernization. So it's really rooted in those three areas to make sure that every legal voter has an opportunity to exercise their rights. But at the same path, make sure we have integrity to keep bad actors out of the election system and ensure that when the polls close, the numbers are counted, everything's certified. Every voter, whether they're Republican, Democrat, Libertarian, Green Party, whatever affiliation, you trust the outcome of that election.
Yeah, and I really think that's important because when you take a look at the polling data, the public's faith in not only the institution of elections, but just kind of government in general, the public's faith in the institutions that we're really supposed to look at, in theory, are supposed to look out for them is really it's at an all-time low. So having some, and regardless of party, being able to look at the election and say, this was done fairly, it was done well between all of the counties are following the same rules. That's a really big deal. So the integrity thing has really been something that has obviously been a focus since the presidential election. Mm-hmm. Can we talk a little bit about what some of the changes are that you would make as it relates to the integrity part of the tripod that you're trying to build here?
Right. So I started a sheet of paper this morning on listing the integrity provisions on this bill. Just quick summaries, one-liners, like boom, boom, boom. I'm on the top of page 3 already. So this is heavy in integrity to ensure we have trust and faith. And really what we're doing is trying to close internal control points, right? We want to make sure that we have the right policies in place so someone can't manipulate the system, which is critically important. It's not about keeping people like legal voters out of the system. It's ensuring that organization groups, and we're talking foreign countries, right? Some really bad actors international. We have bad actors within the United States. So keeping a combination of those entities out of our election system. That's what really we're trying. When you talk about integrity, that's the point of integrity. I know my colleagues across the aisle like to just say, oh, integrity equals voter suppression. That's actually not the case. So probably the first provision we put in here is to actually enhance our current voter ID law. Most people don't know this, but we do have a voter ID law in Pennsylvania. It's been in place since 2014. Department of State has actual guidance listed on its website. It's 16 different IDs you're eligible to use. Some are photo, some are non-photo. It's for first-time voters. So if you show up in your polling place, and it's the first time you show up there, so whether you're newly registered or you've voted in Pennsylvania for your entire life, but you moved and you're coming to that polling place the first time, you got to show some form of ID. That's already a requirement. What do we know? We've had a 7-year pilot program. That's 14 election cycles, at least 2 presidential elections where we have not had one single disenfranchisement or voter suppression lawsuit through that policy. When we look at other states, we see states with more, quote, strict or rigorous voter ID requirements continue to see increase in voter participation for their general electorate. But most importantly, you see it in those minority voters who always, the argument is always, it's going to disproportionately impact lower income, poor minority voters who, quote, don't have these IDs. We did a tour of in your county, our kind of county COVID-19 vaccination center, and they had a sign up that said, show your ID, get a vaccination. So I asked them how that went, what happened. They're like, oh, most people had a photo ID of some sort. We had 5 people that didn't, and we basically used some other utility bill, basically what our current law requires. They turned nobody away. Everybody was able to do something to show that. You go to the bank. I mean, it is what it is today. You want a hunting license, fishing license, you got to go show ID for that.
Right. Yeah. And I think that the fact that you're talking about, not just having it's not strictly limited to a photo ID, that you are making provisions for, those rare circumstances where someone doesn't have ID. Post 9/11, in order to open up a bank account, you needed to have ID. You need to be able to have proof of who you are. The know your customer laws that kind of got put into place to prevent money laundering. So when you look at all the other things that you need a driver's license or an ID for, everything from, just going to the pharmacy. It's to state that there are people who won't be able to vote because they can't produce any form of ID it's a bad faith argument. At this point, we're one of the only industrialized countries in the world that does not require ID to vote. If they can require voter ID in Mexico, I'm pretty sure we can require some voter ID in Pennsylvania. What all are you talking about when you talk about ID? What is acceptable?
Right. So number one, your driver's license or your non-driver's ID. And by the way, we're making those free. You can walk into any PennDOT center and say, I need my driver's license for voting purposes. You get it for free. That's number one. Any government issued ID, so military, federal, any college, university ID, as long as it has your address on there, government letter, so any kind of government letter, utility bill, all those things are eligible to show some form of ID that says, I am Seth Grove and I live at this address. We create a new ID. The Department of State can create a voter ID and mail them to residents for free as well. So we're building all this stuff in. And one cool thing I liked is everybody gets a voter registration card, right? So after you register to vote, every voter has a voter registration card. Like a lot of people I talk to, they have it. I have mine in my wallet. Everybody has their voter ID. We're making it durable. We're adding a signature to it, and we're adding a QR barcode scanner on it. So think of it as your bonus card going into your grocery store. You put in your wallet, it's there. Part of what we're also building is electronic poll books at all of the polling locations across Pennsylvania. So literally, and this is awesome because this is going to help reduce lines and make it really convenient for voters. You walk in, you swipe your driver's license, or you bank your enhanced voter registration card. Your voter registration is automatically pulled up. You sign, you go. You don't have to worry. Walk up to with the paper poll books, right? And say, Seth Grove. They flip through it. It's faster. It's more convenient, and it's far more accurate. So we're building all that technology into it. And at the end of the day, if you, let's say your wallet's out in your truck, you just waded through the line, you get there and say, I forgot my ID, it's in my truck, and you don't want to go out and get it and wait in line again. You can sign an affidavit under perjury of law. If you're willing to go to jail and to validate your ID, that's pretty good too. So we have everything in there. You cannot be turned away. And at the end of the day, even if you don't want to sign the affidavit, under federal law, you cannot be turned away. All you do is do a provisional ballot, and then they'll do the check later to verify to make sure you were a legal voter. So it is impossible. It is impossible in 2020 to be turned away at a polling place in Pennsylvania. Even if you show up and your name's not in the poll book, you can vote. You can do a provisional ballot. They will verify you later. So it is impossible. And that was put into law under HAVA. That's been the law since 2000. That's why we do not see a lot of lawsuits because of voter suppression or disenfranchisement with voter ID laws, because there are tons of times. And really what we're going after here is in 1937, we had agrarian society, right? Everybody knew who they were. So, Martha, who is doing the poll book at the election office, she knows the Smith family just moved. So, John and Marble Smith, they moved. They're not coming in to vote. So if someone comes in and says, I'm John Smith, they know that's not true because they're not there.
Right.
But they knew, the Schmitz down the road, they just moved in. Very nice family. They just registered to vote. They know who these people are. I look at my voter list and just in my precinct, even in my neighborhood, it's so transient. People are moving in and out all the time. There's not a guarantee that poll workers know every single person walking in that polling place, particularly, if I registered to vote and I voted in the presidential general election in 2020, I don't vote again until the next general election for president. Or let's say I skip that one and go another one. That's 8 years. If I have a record of voting every single 8 years, unfortunately, nefarious actors could say, let's pull all these people that have already voted, so they don't need to show an ID under current law, right? Let's pull a list of those, and we'll just go poll to poll saying we are these people and go vote illegally. That's what we're trying to close. We're just trying to make sure those type of actions do not occur, because you're never going to pick them up, because officially a legal voter voted in that election. Unless somebody checks their voter record and says, I didn't vote these past 3 elections. Why do you have me voting? That's the only way to uncover that. And nobody checks their voting record ever.
Yeah. And I think that, looking at this, and you make a good point, the law was originally written in 1937. So, much less in terms of industrialization. We have a opportunity to improve, not only the actual security of the elections, but also the perceived security of elections. Mm-hmm. This is something that has been, folks have been talking about wanting to do for years. Since I've been involved in politics, there has been a sense that, different areas, different counties are following different rules, mm-hmm. and there hasn't been a consistency across the state in terms of how things are being done. Poll watchers not being allowed in different polls, observers not being allowed in to watch the counting being done. So the ID is one thing. Can you talk a little bit about how you're going to improve consistency across the different jurisdictions?
Right. We create a holistic process for uniformity, accountability within the election system. Let's start first with uniformity. You always start, everything that we do should start with the Constitution. So we have the Pennsylvania Constitution has a section on elections. It clearly defines that you should have a uniform election and voter registration system in the entire Commonwealth. That is our starting point of where we should build statute thereafter. That doesn't occur today. We've seen 67 counties doing 67 things. Some are curing, some are not. So it's the wild, wild west out there. And I've been doing this a little while. I heard from a lot of local governments and school districts and a lot of different hearings over my time. I can't say I've ever heard of local government saying, please give us more requirements. We've heard that in the election hearings. Elections officials in counties were basically saying, we need you to give us more uniformity and standardization. We need a level playing book between all counties. And as voters, we should expect we should have the same experience voting in Bucks County than we do in Forest County or Philadelphia and Greene County. You should have the same experience. You have the same expectation walking into that polling place. It should be uniform. So we require a standardization of training for elections directors, poll workers, and judge of elections. We require the Election Law Advisory Board, which was new last year, to develop operation manuals for all three of those. We're going to train them to those standards and to those operational manuals so everyone's on the same spot. So, right, you have to have standardization. You have to have expectations. Once we have those expectations and that manual, that's when we come back with the new Bureau of Election Audits under the Auditor General's office. Their job is to enforce and make sure we have those procedural consistencies throughout every polling place and throughout every county in the Commonwealth. So they will be doing audits on the pre-testing of election machines. They will be doing all the post-election audits, and we're making them more rigorous, as well as doing performance audits on all 67 county election offices, the Department of State's election operations, the SURE system, which is that electronic backbone of our election system, and then auditing the actual voter registration list for the state for accuracy as well. On the back end, we build all that. And finally, we are giving a lot of money to counties in this bill. We're the first state to propose actually doing cost sharing with county elections offices for the cost of doing elections. But we have put a caveat in there. The treasurer will be doing reimbursements, but if any county violates the state law, election law, or comes up with audit findings, their reimbursement gets held until those issues are corrected. So ultimately, we're creating a new system of accountability. Number one, expectations and training. Two, accountability. And three, we have that in that back end to make sure that we don't have elections being run outside the purview of the law.
Yeah, because that would have been my next question. I know we saw everyone might not be familiar with it, but there was the Philadelphia Board of Elections was talking about, well, we're going to accept undated or unsigned. I don't remember which one it was, but they were going to accept something that essentially was illegal in terms of ballots. The legislature essentially threatened, look, if you do this, we're going to impeach you all. So you probably shouldn't, or we will start impeachment procedures at least. The Philadelphia Board of Elections decided they were not going to proceed with that. But if I'm not mistaken, actually Montgomery County's Board of Elections did do the thing that they weren't supposed to do. So, and really at this point, there are no consequences for essentially ignoring the law and just kind of going off the rails.
Right. So there is. That is actually illegal in the election code. So there's a huge section of penalties. In this bill, we actually double all those penalties. The problem is enforcement. So we have a attorney general that has turned a blind eye to election law violations. He doesn't care. He's not doing anything. So within this bill, we actually appoint an independent attorney general to review all election complaints. So if there's even a complaint, they have to go investigate it to make sure there wasn't a law broken. If there's a law broken, they will prosecute that. If it is not a prosecution, it's a election administration issue. They're supposed to take all that report back to the General Assembly on recommendations to fix what they're seeing problems are in Pennsylvania. So we have an additional check and balance. And listen, we in the General Assembly have one enforcement power, impeachment. We shouldn't even have had to do that. The Attorney General of Pennsylvania should have stepped up and actually told counties, if you're in violation of the law, here's the penalties. We will prosecute you. In the case of Montgomery County, they commingled all those ballots. I mean, luckily for Philadelphia, everything was still segregated. Montgomery just commingled all those ballots, so there was no way to separate them. They knew it was against the law. We said it. The court said it. Even the Department of State under the Wolf administration backed that, and they should have known better. Two, Department of State should have done more education around it. But again, had we had that uniform education like we're proposing this bill, this probably wouldn't have happened. But we have a huge misstep when you have a attorney general just ignoring all these problems with the elections and just saying everything's fine. It's just a election law violation, no big deal. But you know, when you start with undated ballots, so it may not change the outcome of this election, but if you allow individuals to continue to ignore the law, it will have an impact on some election at some time. And again, it's non-uniform. There are counties out there that, and we heard back like, well, that's illegal. We're not doing that. So, you know, in I think Lycoming County, the election director said, we didn't do that because it's illegal. Montgomery County saying, we did it. We don't care if it's illegal or not. We're just doing it anyway. Now you have non-uniformity. It's a violation of the Constitution. You have an attorney general turning a blind eye to it. So within this bill, we remedy that by having an independent attorney general who actually has prosecuted election law violations, making sure that every complaint is sent up to them. They review it, prosecute where there's a law violation. If it's an administrative issue, make a report to the General Assembly on how to fix that to try to mitigate this.
And then where does that independent attorney general, where do they come from? Can you explain a little bit how that process is going to work?
Yeah, we have the attorney general appoint the independent prosecutor. We put requirements. They have to be an experienced prosecutor who has successfully prosecuted election law violations. They're appointed 45 days before every election. Their job is to analyze issues within that election. All the complaints heading into counties, all the complaints heading to Department of State will funnel up to them. They will review those complaints to make sure make sure there's nothing that violated the actual law. If they did, they prosecute. And then at the end of the day, all the complaints are put into a report on how to fix those moving forward. Whether sometimes problems are just a county doing something wrong, where it's just go back to the county and say, fix this, right? So that's where the Department of State should be doing technical guidance to help that county. If you start seeing a pattern, that's where policy comes into place. If we have a policy of violations, we need to address that in statute.
Yeah. So how do we, or let me go this way instead. What are some other things in there that people might not even, aren't like the hot button issues that people wouldn't necessarily be thinking about? What are some of the basic, kind of meat and potatoes things that you all are addressing in there?
Yeah. So, Department of State, the Secretary of Department of State, we go into their powers and we basically say, you need to make sure everything you do is based on uniformity. You can't do anything outside of what the law provides. So we're kind of banking them in on doing your job, right? Your job shouldn't be creating policy. Your job should be abiding by the policy put into there. A lot of list maintenance. We have one of the worst voter registration lists in the country. We have an old law on list maintenance, so we bring up a lot of new stuff. Federal law has certain provisions on removing individuals from the voter list, except for deceased individuals. So we were just successfully sued. Organization said you got 20,000 dead people on your list. Court said, you know what, you're right. You got to go remove them. So we have a requirement on the department and counties to remove deceased individuals, and we give them tools. So we're utilizing data analytics. So the Department of State and counties have full access to state databases, so they can start doing a better job of ensuring those voter registration lists are up to date. And we give them permission to remove deceased individuals instantaneously. Once you know someone has died, you can remove them automatically. I know this is a great pet peeve. It's not a big deal, but sometimes counties will do mailings to voters. So if they're mailing the ballot, if they're mailing an application, if they're doing a mailer, they'll get back non-deliverable.
Right.
you're on the list, that's your address, it's
Yeah.
non-deliverable. That's a problem. That means you don't have a clean list. So we require them to actually investigate that, figure out why it's non-deliverable. Does the county have the address wrong, or does that person not exist?
Right.
Have they moved? Like, that needs investigated. We need to figure that stuff out. Fully access ERIC, which is kind of like the interstate compact, but we take it a step further. We basically say, if the Department of State, the Secretary sees a voter registration coming in from another state, so someone moves to Pennsylvania from another state, they register to vote, they will notify the state they came from to say, this person just registered in Pennsylvania. If they were registered in your state, you may want to remove them. Now, that's not reciprocal. We can't force another state to do it, but we're hoping that catches on to say, newly registered from another state, we'll do the notification back to the other state. And I don't know a state in the nation that does that. Signature capture, signature verification, 2 unique identifiers on the mail-in ballots. So we have a lot of integrity provisions to really close those loopholes moving forward. We lock down drop boxes, satellite offices, to make sure they can't be abused in the future. So we do a lot of stuff. The number one disenfranchisement of voters in any election is actually a long wait time in line, right? New York, we had a 4-hour wait. And we don't have any standards. So we're putting a standard in that we expect counties to have no more than a 30-minute wait time in their lines for election day voting. Try to do your best to get to there. But that should be the expectation. It's not, we don't want to put the money into it. I mean, you get in line, it's 4-hour wait, you're out of there. People got a busy life. We should have the expectation where we're going to try to do our best to mitigate those long lines so people can get in, vote, and get out.
Yeah, we need to have Chick-fil-A running some of these lines in order to get people in and out. Yeah.
Right.
So, I mean, it sounds like overall, you have really tried to address as many problems that people have encountered, and also the concerns that people have raised as it relates to some of the changes that took place, either because of Supreme Court decision or just statutory changes. I am very, I guess, even before really seeing the law that had come out, I was, disappointed but not surprised by the reaction from the Wolf administration, as well as Democratic members of the House and Senate, saying essentially, we're not going to do anything as it relates to voter ID, regardless of how I don't want to say lax, but regardless of how voter friendly it is in terms of what you can provide. Is this just an issue? What do you think what's going to happen? Is this going to move like on a partisan basis and just kind of go from there, or what do you think is going to happen over the next couple of months with this?
Yeah, I don't think this is a really partisan bill. We have a lot of stuff to increase access for voters. Starting in 2025, we're authorizing in-person early voting. We have a lot put in here to help disabled individuals vote, because in 1937, legislature didn't care about disabled people voting. We have a lot of stuff in here to make sure polling places are ADA accessible. We have a voters bill of rights. We have a senior citizens bill of rights, and we have a disabled voters bill of rights. We're the first state to have all three. We have provide assistance for long-term care facilities and nursing homes to help their residents vote safely and securely. So this is a pretty broad bill that, all the counties' issues, we went through the checklist. Everything the counties have wanted and requested, we put in this legislation, including long-term sustainable funding for elections for them and cost sharing and so forth. So, if this gets on Governor Wolf's desk, it's a hard veto from him, because it does a lot of great stuff that people have asked for, and in a reasonable way. Nothing in here actually disenfranchises voters. It actually does more enfranchising. We just make sure we have the right policies in place to keep the bad actors out of the system. So I think they're going to have a difficult time. Even messaging from my Democratic colleagues, I really haven't, the only thing I've really heard is we don't like the Bureau of Election Audits. But, audits should be kind of independent. It's the main point of having an audit. So we're moving in a different direction. than what we're currently done. So I haven't heard back from the Wolf administration. Our last discussion was April 24th at 10 a.m. with his chief of staff. I haven't heard back. Love to have a conversation around the product we put out, which I think is really landmark legislation to really improve. Again, our goal is to make sure the excitement of election night are close elections, not the administration,
Right.
not how the outcomes came to be. We just want nice, easy elections and everyone's cheering for their candidate. And at the end of the day, we want the candidates to know, no, I definitely won, or unfortunately, I definitely lost. That's the goal.
Yeah, and I think the level of effort and detail that you and other legislators put into this is really, it's commendable. At 147 pages, it's a massive piece of legislation. So I'm sure that there will be changes as it moves through the legislative process. But the fact that you took a 70 odd 80-year-old law and are trying to bring it into, when people think about 80 years ago, there were a lot of homes that didn't have indoor plumbing in Pennsylvania. So we're moving, really into a very different, a really different time frame where the types of technology, the types of things that individuals are concerned about has really shifted from what it was when this law was written. And I think that the legislation that you all put together is really it's a fantastic piece of work that's trying to address it's an enormous system and an incredibly important system.
Right.
So
if Democrats and the national media can get behind the fake narrative and their big lie that a Republican election bill is just voter suppression, we could have the best election system in the Commonwealth. But that's the big problem. The Democrats have their own big lie. They want to push it out there. And it's not. It was found factually inaccurate in Georgia and in a lot of other places. And that's not true today. Read through the bill, see all the great provisions. To me, it's hard to say no. It really is.
Well, I know you have a lot going on. I appreciate the time that you took today, just coming on and explaining some of the things that are in there. There's a lot more. And as everything progresses, I'll definitely try and have you back on so we can talk about, any changes that take place and some of the other provisions that are in there that we just didn't have time to get to today. Again, Representative Seth Grove, thank you very much for coming on today and joining us. I know that our audience greatly appreciated it.
Will do, Leo. Thank you so much for having me.